You're listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, giving you weekly sports analysis, opinions, and discussion. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and J-Raff.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 166th episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Mays. Alongside of me, co-host J-Raff.
Yeah, it's good to be back. We had a little bit of time off to kind of regroup, recharge the batteries a little bit, and after a successful weekend. But it's good to be back and talk about some of the sports things that have happened. This is kind of that odd time for our show.
Yeah, one of them.
We kind of. Well, we admit this. We identify with football a lot, pretty much from the end of July, when training camps
pretty
start,
much, yeah,
straight up through the Super Bowl and kind of post-Super Bowl talk. Now, to be honest, the Combine was last week, and you've got, the draft stuff coming up. Now, because they've pushed the draft back. Correct?
Well, they pushed it back last year, and
right.
They moved it up like 2 weeks. It's still not the third or fourth weekend in April, but I think there's an extra weekend in April this year, so there's just it's April 30th, May 1st, May 2nd, whereas last year was mid-May,
which is kind of cool because just real quick, I know we don't want to get into everything yet, but May 2nd, that's Saturday, is the same night as the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight. You have potential for playoff games in hockey and in basketball. And baseball games will be going on. They're like,
it's a pretty big day.
Right. Now, they're like, we're projecting from pretty far out, but that could be a pretty awesome sports day.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
And the headliner will be day 3 of the draft. I know for most people it'll be Pacquiao-Mayweather, but I don't care about boxing at all. I'm happy that fight is happening so we can stop hearing about is it ever going to happen, because even as a non-boxing fan, like, you hear about it all the time. It's always Pacquiao-Mayweather. When's it going to happen? They go back and forth. And so, yeah, finally that's going to be happening. But apparently May 2nd, pretty good day. Who's it? What we get? Text?
Yeah, we already got a text saying they hope we talk about how the Phillies had a pretty miserable day.
Well, we talked about it pre-show. I wasn't really going to bring it up on the episode just because I don't really want to talk about how terrible the Phillies are going to be.
Kind of a
we'll have a whole episode dedicated to how terrible the Phillies are going to be.
And I'm sure random checkpoints throughout the summer where
we'll be. Let's check in on how terrible the Phillies are now.
Yeah, it'll be like the weather reports on Family Guy episodes. It's gonna rain.
It's gonna rain. We ain't gonna score runs.
Swim it out.
So yeah, interesting time of the year, just mostly because we're only in baseball spring training. You have hockey going on. That trade deadline is approaching. You have basketball going on. That trade deadline has passed. But we're not huge NBA fans, especially when the Sixers are god awful like they are right now. We're Flyers fans.
Honest, though,
they're teetering on the NFL playoff or NHL playoff.
Let's talk about Sixers here. If they were maybe, 20% better, all right? So let's say they were better, maybe on I say bottom half, meaning more towards the middle of the pack of the lottery, but not good enough. So not good enough to really win the lottery. Not really good enough to make the playoffs, but that sub-mediocre level. That would definitely be worse, because at least the Sixers are being talked about. Now, I know a lot of people are talking about them in a negative way.
They wanted to change rules because of them.
Right. But, I look at it a little differently. At least they're being talked about. At least they're relevant. Now, they may not be relevant in a competitive standpoint, but they are relevant. They've got potentially 9 draft picks this year. That sounds crazy because we talk a lot of NFL draft.
And 6 of them are in the second round or something.
Except the NFL draft is 7 rounds, right? NBA draft is 2 rounds. 9 picks in 2 rounds. That's crazy. Now, yes, a lot of them are in the second round, and who knows?
But what I like, you don't get ESPN The Magazine anymore.
I don't.
And the only reason I still get it and subscribe to anything through ESPN is because I use it for my work for Draft Tech. I'm actually kind of required to do that.
Right. You get the insider stuff.
So it's one of those things where I kind of have to use it, so I'm going to get the magazine, and I'll read a couple articles here and there every so often. And the one that came out this past week was, or whenever the publication date is, but it was the analytics issue. And they had an entire thing on the 76ers, which was really interesting. And not being a basketball fan, but being a huge analytics, statistics guy, it was very interesting to read about basketball's use, and that's like the 76ers are driving that in the NBA because that's what they're using. It's almost like Moneyball for basketball is kind of what they're trying to do.
Right.
And then the second round picks have a lot to do with that.
And it's funny because they didn't they rank every like major professional
from every single sport, and the Sixers were high up there, and the Phillies were like second or third to last.
Right. Like Phillies were amongst the absolute worst in all of sports of using analytics.
And Flyers weren't that high either. They weren't like in the bottom half, or they were in the bottom half, but not like the bottom like 10.
I'd be interested if that has changed at all since Hextall has come on and made some decisions. I imagine it didn't hurt them when Hextall came on.
I think actually all of the teams we favor on the rise, even the Phillies. And when you're that terrible, obviously you're going to go up. But they hired someone last year as an extern from MLB to kind of start an analytics statistical analysis department, and they actually brought him on the payroll and have a department. So the Phillies are rising. I just told you before the show, a guy that I have some limited interaction with from the Dolphins was head of their analytics program. And he just was promoted yesterday to director of analytics for the Dolphins.
I would be interested to know, and not let me rephrase it. I'd be interested to know the outcome of this. I wouldn't be interested to actually do this, but to watch the broadcasts and everything from this past season versus 2 seasons ago in the NFL, and see how many times just the word metrics or second level stats or whatever those terms are that they use, those next level stats where they're just talking about those more analytic aspects of the game. We're not necessarily just looking at straight passing yards. They're breaking it down a little bit more. I'd be interested to see just in terms of how much more often that was mentioned this year on the broadcast
versus a couple years ago.
I remember a couple years ago watching the Super Bowl. They did a thing where there were 2 commercials that had hashtags mentioned or on the screen in the commercials.
But now 90%
and now
of
it's
them
blown up and it's everywhere. Because that's just a thing now. And it's just funny to see how you just need that tipping point and then it just kind of explodes. Baseball's reached that. Not the Phillies, but actually maybe the Phillies.
They're working.
Now.
They're working their way to that point.
The Phillies are just going to be on the outside of that giant snowball because they were way downhill and one of the last to get pulled in on it. Whereas you have the Sixers, who were, let's be honest, they weren't that good. I know some people are mad because they're like, yeah, but they made the playoffs a few years ago and they beat the Bulls. Yeah, they beat the Bulls because Derrick Rose blew out his ACL. They didn't have a shot in that series until Derrick Rose blew out his ACL. They might win a game, maybe 2 games. There's no way they're beating them in a best-of-7 series. And they got to it because Derrick Rose blew out his ACL. And the team was stumbling. Not like Derrick Rose blew out his ACL weeks before and they had time to prepare. No, in the series, Derrick Rose blew out his ACL.
Right.
So they didn't have time to prep or anything. If you're the Sixers, I know people are angry, but... Yeah, listen, you're all in on this. The guy I feel bad for, I don't feel bad for the players. I feel bad for Brett Brown. He finally gets a chance to be a coach. I just hope that if he wants to stay, he has the opportunity to stay and see it through. I would imagine they're going to give Sam Hinkie the opportunity to see it through. I would imagine that Sam Hinkie would let Brett Brown see it through as long as Brett Brown wants to be there. However, you talk about the toll that the losing takes on some of the young players. Well, you know what? That takes a toll on the coach, too. He might just want to be like, listen, I want to go be an assistant somewhere else again. Because I think the rest of the league would kind of forgive him for not wanting to stick through this Sixers rebuild, if you want to call it that.
So
it's just I don't know. It's interesting to see teams that literally are just a few hundred yards apart from where their offices are. At least for now, the Sixers are moving. I know they're building that new facility, but it's interesting to see how far apart they actually are in terms of their philosophies. At least at this point, we'll see if that gap closes, though.
Now, this is always hard to do without doing some scientific study, but the top 10 teams, and I'll read them off here according to ESPN, the evaluation of analytics department. Top 10 teams are relatively successful or are building to that. Is that because they ranked the analytics department and that's how it ended up happening, or are they looking at look how good these teams are? The analytics department, it's one of those things you'd have to dive into. How did they get to this? But obviously, they don't explain their journey to these rankings. But the Sixers not only were in the top, they were number 1. The 76ers were ranked number 1 in analytics, using them to adapt to their sports philosophy. So Philadelphia 76ers number 1. The other top 10 teams...
definitely not looking at the product.
No,
and saying,
it couldn't be completely, but
there has to be a factor.
The 76ers put it out there that this is what they're doing.
Right.
So you knew that this is what they're doing. So much like Billy
Beane did with Moneyball in Oakland. He said, yeah, we're going to have people who are, I know the movie's not exactly how it went down, but, there are a lot of people who were like, this is going to be junk. You're going to, like, work your way out of baseball. Well, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. And, the Sixers, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of people are like, Sam Hinkie's going to get himself fired, never get a chance. Listen, the owner had to know what he was getting into when you hired him. Like, Sam Hinkie hasn't, like, come in and done something else. Like, this is who he is. This is the philosophy that he believes in. And, like, that's the way they've got to go now.
The number 2 team is the Houston Astros, who have been kind of relatively worse than mediocre, downright terrible over the last few seasons, but they're slowly rising. They have guys, and probably a credit to their analytics department to find these guys. High draft picks surely help as well, but you're also going to draft a high draft pick maybe that you are more comfortable with based on those sabermetrics and the second level stats and things like that. Next is the Houston Rockets, who I believe Sam Hinkie has a relationship with. He worked with Houston before, so he has his handprint over them a little bit, at least in the past. Next has been the Rays, who have been a successful baseball team of the last decade. Ditto for the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Spurs, the Mavericks, the Athletics, you got Moneyball right there, and then the Blackhawks. Of those teams, the 76ers and Astros are the worst. They're the two at the top. And the Rockets, I guess, championship-wise, don't have the success, but they're building a team. James Harden being there, and someone you like now for punching LeBron James in the groin or something.
I just saw the headline. I'm like, I like James Harden.
So the top 3 teams don't have the championship success, at least right now at this time. But the ones behind them, I mean, even the Rays haven't won it, but they've been there. They've been good. They've been to the playoffs.
For it,
but Red Sox, Yankees, Spurs, Mavericks have all won a championship in the last 10 years, 5 years, really. Well, I guess the Yankees, it's 6 years now. But ditto for the Blackhawks, who are expected to be in contention there again.
And Oakland competes every year.
And even with the crappy payroll, the crappy stadium, the Athletics
literally
are always
crappy.
there.
We're all sewage in the locker room all the time.
So obviously those top 10 teams either are building towards a contender or are perennial contenders for at least the playoffs.
Yeah, and we were just talking about how this is, analytics has just exploded. Another tie kind of to our show in terms of things we talk about. There was just a conference on analytics and their involvement in coaches' decisions and program decisions and things like that. And James Franklin actually was a speaker. He was a guest, I guess I should say, at the recent conference at MIT. And it's just interesting because they talk about how there was a lot of talk over the last few years about how Penn State took a different approach than a lot of schools. Because they didn't have the luxury of missing on guys, and the things they needed to do, it was a little different. And just some of the guys they've brought in, it kind of have adapted to that. And you don't see it a ton at the college level because it's a whole different animal right now. But eventually you will. Like I think to some degree, you're going to see that at the college level as well.
Yeah, it's harder to quantify because at least. You
don't have the insight into the
You're dealing with high school kids going to college instead of college going to professional, and there's just such a huge gap between high school and college and professional. But anyways, so let's talk a little bit. I know we were getting into an analytics thing, which is fine. We really had no direction for this show. We were just kind of talk sports, kind of like we do.
Which we were a little worried that we weren't going to have anything to talk about.
Yeah, 15 minutes into the show, we haven't even done a contact us yet. But let's quick divert before we dive in a little bit more into this analytics talk and everything else that's happened in the 2+ weeks since we've been on the air. And we'll do the contact us here. We'll send out the contact information. So there's multiple ways you can do that, and Justin's going to pass along that information right now.
Yeah, we'd love to have you contact the show. You can do that a couple different ways. One way, you can call the show. That works best during the show. The number to call us, you can use the Maze Sandwich Shop hotline at 530-563-6297. Again, 530-563-6297. You can also use the Maze Sandwich box, the Maze Sandwich Shop inbox. I mean, I guess you could get your sandwiches in boxes there. But that email address
we don't do that.
Joe Mays and J-Raff at gmail.com. Again, Joe Mays and J-Raff at gmail.com. We're also on social media, so you can find us all over the place there.
Yeah, in addition to the email, the phone, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, Facebook is just search for the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Twitter, we're at Joe Mays and J-Raff. And also, I'd like to point out that we can also receive text. Obviously, if you have our personal numbers, you can text us there. But you can also text the show at 215-315-3199. Again, you can send us a text if you don't have our numbers at 215-315-3199. All right, so back to the analytics issue at hand. And I'm gonna go through where the Philadelphia teams are in terms of ESPN talking about if basically do they use it or do they not. And we already kind of touched on this. The 76ers, obviously, they use it. They're ranked number 1 in all of American professional sports as being all in with analytics. Near the bottom, and I don't know exactly right here off the top of my head where the Phillies rank, but they are last or tied for last with the Miami Marlins as non-believers. And I did mention that I think this was done possibly before more information came out from Ruben Amaro and the Phillies front office and management.
I would imagine almost had to come out like before, or be compiled before, because this isn't a piece you just put together like, overnight. And this is something they clearly have been working on for a while. Yeah, but the Phillies are in their category that they consider non-believers. So, tough sell there. And anyone that follows the Phillies like we do, they're clearly non-believers to
this point.
They've tried to make some changes, but we'll see how those changes actually apply. Now, to be fair, they're not. It's not like you can just switch. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You can switch philosophies. It doesn't necessarily change the guys you have on the field. And so you gotta let contract situations play themselves out and things like that. So we'll have to wait and see how this goes moving forward.
Yeah, and now in the NHL, we talked about the Flyers are kind of middle of the pack. They're classified as 1 foot in, and that is really the middle. There's non-believers, skeptics, 1 foot in, believers, and all in. In the NHL, only the Blackhawks are considered all in, but there's a group of looks like about 12 or 13 teams that are considered believers, and then the Flyers are part of 1 foot in. But like you mentioned, I would think at least a couple years ago, if not even last year, they probably would have been a skeptic. But Hextall is moving them more towards using these upper level statistics and ranking people individually based on a whole bunch of things, not just standard assists, goals, plus minus,
right.
penalties and minutes, and save percentage. I think there's a whole bunch of different things that they can go through. The Flyers are trending upward like the Phillies. Sixers really can't go much higher. And then you have the NFL again. They're only. The only problem with the NFL is that, and this is broken down a bit in the article, is that it's probably the most difficult sport to have individual statistics because pretty much every single player depends on someone else. So it's really hard to break it down to individuals. A lot of places are trying to do that. I love Football Outsiders and Pro Football Reference, which is just a stats accumulation. They don't really do too much of creating statistics, although I do love their approximate value. But the other big one is ProFootballFocus.com. Football Outsiders, Pro Football Focus, Pro Football Reference, those are all great places for stats and as close to you get as to sabermetrics for the NFL as you can. You might hear them talk about DVOA, and they also rank individual players by position. So it's really a great tool to have. But in the NFL, because it's somewhat new and very difficult to do, there are none that are classified as all into the analytics and statistics pool. There's a bunch of teams that are considered believers. I think there's 9 teams. One of them is the Philadelphia Eagles. So they're probably I'd guess in all of pro sports in the top third, which is a good place to be, at least if you buy into this kind of stuff, which I do. Oh, and yeah. It seems like you probably do too.
I do. I do. In terms of buy-in, I don't think that you necessarily have to do it to be successful. And I know this comes up in baseball a lot. And I'm not necessarily like one of the purists, but I hate the idea of speeding up the game and stuff. I know that's unrelated to analytics and things like that, but so in some ways I am one of the baseball purists, but I understand and I completely can go with some of these next level stats. But I'm okay if teams decide not to. You know, like, I don't think they need it to be successful. But I think where you find some problems is where you kind of get caught in the middle. Like where you're making some decisions based off of analytics and some not. Like I kind of worry about, all right, well, are they going to kind of have conflicting interests there at some time? Like how do you make those decisions? As long as it's thought through, like I'm okay. But like, you know, when you have, like, I'd rather a team be all in or a skeptic, or, you know, or almost like a non-believer, like kind of half in, half out. I kind of wonder, like, what does that entail? Does that mean, like, you know, some decisions, you know, on like personnel decisions, we use some more of the advanced metrics, but in terms of like game managing decisions, we don't, or, you know, like that's kind of what I would want to, like, a breakdown of, or like, you know, sometimes basically what I'm saying is I don't want it to be like in baseball, for example. We're not going to bunt because the metrics tell us not to bunt.
Right.
And then other times you do bunt. Like, that's what I don't want. Either, like, you're all in and we're not going to bunt. Okay. Like, because the metrics tell us it's better not to. Or, listen, we're going to bunt sometimes. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, I'm okay with both of those, but, like, using the metrics to defend it sometimes and then doing those exact things. Like, I feel that can happen if you're caught in the middle. So, like, if you have a GM who's all in on metrics, I think you should have a manager or coach who's all in on metrics. And that's what I think has happened with the Eagles, who, if we go back to you don't have to pull it up, but the Eagles were in that highest of the NFL categories because there were no all-ins. They were in the believers. And, like, I think that's the way they've gone. Like, giving Chip Kelly more power. We talked about this a little bit, you know, a month or so ago. I think if you're going with Chip Kelly as your coach, who's clearly like this different guy as the coach, let him make more of the decisions. You need more of, like, you can't be going back and forth. You can't have one guy going like, you know what, my gut tells me I need this guy. No, and then you're using metrics on every other position. No, don't do that. Like, either use the metrics or not, which leads to some interesting conversations for the Eagles as we move forward over the next 2 months about who they're going to take in the draft and what they're going to do with draft picks.
Right.
And those kinds of decisions. Like, all right, well, like, if Chip Kelly's into using metrics and the Eagles are into using metrics and all those things, that's fine. If the metrics tell you to make a move for Mariota, okay. But if you're taking Mariota on a gut, then I'm like, well, why are we using all these metrics for some things but the gut decisions on others? Now, again, I don't know. It's so confusing in that sense just because you're like, well, what do you do with, like, so much of coaching, it seems, comes down to gut decisions. You could argue that a lot of that is you processing those metrics, maybe not the math of those, but that line of thinking, you know, on your own, just from your experiences. But I don't know. It's the more you dig into it, the more you have to kind of deal with, and sometimes in those moment decisions, it's kind of interesting to see how it plays out. But I don't think having more information can be a bad thing. You know, like. And when you look at these teams, like the Sixers need to completely rebuild. How is having the most information and going with a common theme to build your team from nothing, how is that a bad thing? Like, I don't get how that's a bad thing. You know, that's my take on it.
Now, I do want to point out that, you know, we said the 76ers were number one, and we said that the Phillies were one of the worst, if not the worst, in the major league, and near the bottom, you know, in the bottom 10, near the bottom overall. They actually were last. The Phillies were ranked 122nd. Yeah. Now, I know that that's trending upwards. Obviously, there isn't too much higher they can go, or there's a lot higher they can go. They can't go any lower. So that's going to jump next year at this time. Hopefully, we see the Phillies in at least the top 100. Hopefully, they jump to 20-some teams. So Sixers won. Phillies 122, got some Philadelphia bookends. Eagles probably in the top third. They don't break it down and list all of them. They kind of just do top 10 and bottom 10. Dolphins are part of 1 foot in the NFL, so they're in middle of the pack. I got two texts from my dad. First is he wants to know if we're doing the March Madness pool because he wants to win again.
I've got some questions on that too.
Yeah, actually. I guess people really look forward. Of all the stuff we've done, apparently the March Madness pool is one that people like.
People look forward to us being nice enough to let them beat us so that they feel good about it.
And they can come on the show. I mean, there's so many people that just want to come on the show.
I know, it's just...
we just have this long list,
Right,
and
exactly.
they get to say, hey, you want to get on the show, you got to win the March Madness pool. So yes, we will be doing the March Madness pool. That'll probably actually be our next show. I'll touch on that at the end. But Selection Sunday will probably be our next show, and we'll unveil later that evening. We'll send out links for link to our bracket challenge, which we'll do again. But the second one from my dad, he wants to know where his Cowboys. And actually, Dad, the Cowboys, they're not in the top 10 overall, but they're one of the believers in the NFL, right in there with the Eagles we've mentioned. Other teams that are believers in the NFL are the Falcons, the Ravens, the Browns, Jaguars, Chiefs, Patriots, and 49ers are with the Cowboys and Eagles, classified as believers in the analytics and upper-level statistics or new age things that are coming out. And it's interesting to see because you point out, all right, Eagles have been wildly successful the last 10, 15 years. Ditto for the Patriots. Cowboys this year, not so much, too much in the last 2 decades, but this year they had a resurgence. Ravens, very good. Falcons had a couple good years, but then you have teams like the Browns, the Jaguars, and the Chiefs. You're just kind of like, well, I mean, some of those teams make it look good, but then there's a few that you're like, well, if they're using it, how is that helping?
Yeah. So I think some of those, when we look at it, it's just, again, we don't know exactly how they broke down every single team, but I think some of those, like you said, like it doesn't surprise me at all that the Patriots are in that group.
No, not at all. I probably would have been shocked if they weren't.
Like Browns, I'm kind of surprised because they fire their coaches and people left and right there, and other people just leave. I did get a message saying like our second season that we did the pool, the winner was not on the show. Jamie was not on the show.
Oh. Well, she's more than welcome to join us.
The offer stands. So.
Bring Austin along. We'll have a big family get together. Maybe we'll have Kelly and Natalie come down, and we can just have the kids screaming at each other. That'd be a lot of fun. But maybe we'll have to have Jamie on. We'll have to get that done.
She'll probably win this year, and then she'll just start hosting.
Oh, great. Well, I'm always looking for an upgrade. So
J-Raff would still work.
that would work. That's great. We wouldn't have to get new shirts, new signs, or anything. But in the NFL, I think the crappy teams are an anomaly in terms of the believers. Like I think if you went down the whole list, I think it's probably better to use these advanced metrics because in the skeptics you have teams that have been historically over the last couple of decades pretty terrible. The Rams since Greatest Show on Turf, what have they done since 2001?
Nothing.
Not too much. The Steelers are an outlier in this because. And probably the Giants, although it was really just those 2 years. Like, outside of 07 and 11, what have they done in the last 15 years? They had 2 great runs, and you won the Super Bowl. Awesome. Right. But outside of that, they're not consistently challengers.
They're consistently old, and they're consistently overmatched at positions. Like, those years they had great defenses, all right? They've not been good in, like... I know they've had some good defenses other years, but not for a few years. They've been awful on defense the last few years.
And then you have the Saints, who, if they don't have Breeze, that team, I think, is terrible.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look at them this year. Breeze may be trending downwards, and
Breeze
look what
wasn't
happened.
himself, and they were awful, Yeah, and that's... Yeah, when you look at that skeptic, you look in there. Bless you.
Thank you.
Like, Arizona. Arians is obviously safe because of what they just did. Carolina... If they don't have a good year this year, their coach could still be gone. I know they made the playoffs.
Yeah, but
they're constantly looking for Ron Rivera to go.
Now,
Cincinnati Bengals, again, if they don't have a good year, their coach is gone.
Right,
Denver Broncos just got a coach, so like they're gonna.
But Manning's gone after this year.
Right,
no
and
way
then it's going to
playing.
be interesting because they're going to have a drop off. Detroit Lions, I think. I can't think of the guy's name that's there, but like he has them going in the right
Penn
direction.
Stater,
I think.
Jim Caldwell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Houston Texans, I think they're okay. Indianapolis Colts.
The thing about them is,
like
if you don't have a franchise quarterback in Manning or Luck, the Colts probably not anything.
Right. And then if you look at the top, though, it's kind of interesting to look at some of those because, like, 49ers, do they have a franchise quarterback? I think there's some question to that. A lot of people think Kaepernick's the guy, and I agree with that. I mean, I can understand that, but like, do they have a guy? I don't know. Do the Eagles? A lot of doubt there too. Like, you go through it's kind of all over the place, but when you go to the non-believers...
the non-believers just emphasize the point. First of all, you have the Jets and Redskins who have been god-awful for a number of years. I know at the beginning of the Rex Ryan tenure, he had the Jets there, but they were buying into Mark Sanchez, which everyone should have known that wasn't going to work out. The Redskins have been just awful.
Didn't Idzik just get hired? Didn't Idzik just get hired for a position
somewhere? So did Tannenbaum with my Dolphins.
It was one of the
not as general manager, because Dennis Hickey's the general manager, but
Idzik might have been the Jags.
Yeah, you're right. Or he was interviewing for it.
Right.
But then
he might not have gotten
Then you have the Chargers. Of this list, the Chargers are probably the most successful team of the non-believers.
The only team on there with a proven quarterback that can do something. And I'm not a huge Philip Rivers fan, but of those teams, the Jets, Chargers, Titans, and Redskins, the only one with a proven quarterback is the Chargers.
You're going to take Mike Vick, Geno Smith, Philip Rivers, Jake Locker, or Zach Mettenberger, or Robert Griffin, or Kirk Cousins. Philip Rivers is by far the best quarterback. He's better than all of them combined.
Yeah, like Vic, like a decade and a half ago, he would have been by far your best in that group.
And Robert Griffin, as a rookie, he was pretty good. I just think if you went through it, if you run a statistical analysis of the statistical analysis ranking, I just think it would correlate to the successful teams over the last decade are probably the ones that have been bought into this, and that's just a correlation. Obviously, advanced statistics doesn't mean that there's a causation, but there's a correlation there that the teams that are buying into upper level statistics are producing more on the field, more consistently, probably winning 10 games, more consistently winning division titles, making the playoffs, and challenging for conference championships and Super Bowls. And that's what you want.
Right. And that leads to an interesting thing. Like, if we talk about, having like a consistency, building consistency, which is a lot of what the numbers are based on. You want to do what's going to work most of the time. It may not be, it's usually not the biggest gamble. It's usually the most sure thing is what you're going to do in these analytics.
Right.
Which leads to an interesting thing because Oakland kind of introduced this, at least mainstream-wise, to the bigger group with Billy Beane and Oakland and Moneyball and all that stuff. And this year, like last season, baseball season, they kind of it appeared that they kind of threw that out the window. And they went and got everyone, and it didn't work. And then they traded everyone away.
They got rid of them.
We made our run, and now we're going back to, what got us here.
They tried to buy in. It didn't work out. But they're still there. They're not in salary cap hell, which a lot of teams, especially in the NFL, tend to be. I mean, but that's the thing. Some of those teams that have recent success but don't buy into the analytics, they're the ones that have the salary cap issues. Because they weren't non-believers. They were skeptics. The Steelers and Saints. The Steelers tend to put a very good product on the field, challenging for division titles when I didn't think they had any chance this year. They end up winning it now. They fall to the Ravens in the first round.
But they have to restructure big contracts every year.
They have to sign Ben Roethlisberger, you would think. I mean, unless they start using analytics and say, hey, when a quarterback gets older, he tends to drop off. Let's not waste the money. Let's restructure. Let's extend it for a year or two.
Like, in this, imagine trying to make that sell. Like, I'm not saying it's the right decision to make, but imagine being like, listen, you know what? We're going to let Ben go, and we're going to try someone else. Like, obviously, that's not what they're going to do.
You could do that if you had someone in place. Like, they don't have anyone in place, you wouldn't think.
Nothing in place. Which means, but that leads to...
Didn't they take Landry Jones in the late rounds over the last few years?
Well, and you look in the NFL, so much of the drafts are made out to be personal. Like, if they draft a quarterback in the first day or two, everybody's going to freak out.
First day, everyone would freak out because that's only the first round.
Right. But, like, even if they draft the quarterback on day two, everybody's going to freak out.
Second or third round.
Like, everybody will freak out. They'll be like, my gosh.
It happened last year.
Ben needs so much help.
With the Patriots.
Yeah.
Didn't they get Garoppolo in the third round?
Yeah, they did.
I mean, maybe it was fourth. No, I can't recall. It could have been second.
Like, everybody's like, and then they start out 2-2.
They pretty much just say, they're like, Garoppolo is the future of the Patriots.
Right.
And I know someone has been hyping up that Brady's not going to finish career just in New England. That's what they're saying, because there'll come a time where he's making too much, they can't keep restructuring, moving it on, that they think that he'll end up being released and playing somewhere else for a year or two, like Favre and Manning.
Well, I think New England has more ties to Tom Brady than Tom Brady does to New England. But that's a year-to-year thing in the NFL. Like, we saw it this week. Those NFL contracts don't mean anything past the year you were in. They mean nothing. Like, it's all about, and they've talked about this more, it's all about guaranteed money and your signing bonus. Like, that's basically what it comes down to, because they always talk about Tom Brady took a pay cut. No, he didn't. He restructured his deal so he gets more guaranteed and less during the season. He restructures it all the time, and it does help the team. But it's not, it's not like he's like, oh, pay me less, guys. That'll be fantastic. Yeah. No, but and you're right. Someday that's going to come. Like they're going to need to get some other pieces in place, and it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they've let everyone else go. Like everyone else.
I mean, I don't want to say that they're not loyal, but they know how to run. The Patriots are a business. Like they know how to operate.
They are loyal to the success of the company,
of the team. Yeah, right. That's that's a perfect way to put it.
And interchangeable parts. Like unless you are Tom Brady to this point, and I say to this point, they're not going to trade him this offseason or anything like that. But like maybe after next year, you never know.
Right. You have Robert Kraft, who's the owner in this allegory. The owner, he's not going anywhere. But Bill Belichick is the CEO. He's pretty safe too. And then Tom Brady's the president. There's this chain that goes down. But the president can get ousted a lot easier than the CEO will. Same thing goes with the CEO versus the owner. Right. I mean, obviously with mega corporations, you have a board and all that crap that goes on there. But there's this hierarchy in place, and the Patriots are loyal to the one at the top. I mean, even above Robert Kraft, the ownership is the Patriots as a team, as a group,
right,
as a squad,
right. And nothing has exemplified that more than the decisions that have been made by Bill Belichick and
his front office and Robert Kraft, the owner.
And so you have to think that. Let's just think, this will sound terrible, and I know it's the persona he gives off, but is there a more heartless coach that would just say, I know you've done a lot for me, Tom, but good luck.
It's time to move on.
Yeah. Like
if someone's going to do it, it's him.
Right, exactly. And I know that's the persona he gives up, because a lot of players, I shouldn't say all, a lot of players love playing for him, and they don't want to leave when they have to leave. But, like, I can absolutely see him doing it.
And it's one of those things, though, but I think Brady understands that, and he would be
he knows.
Mad about going out, respect the decision, but still want to stick it to him. I think you can still have respect, but still be upset.
It's all part of the give and take with the team. He allows the team to have more flexibility, because he knows they don't always use it the way he wants it to be used. They got him to restructure his deal a few years ago. Like basically everyone said, because he thought that meant they were going to go get Wes Welker. Well, they didn't. Well, it turns out that was a good move for them.
Yeah,
but
probably because of analytics,
right? But it still wasn't real popular with Tom Brady at the time. He's got to know. Listen, you're going to give me more guaranteed money because I know someday you're going to cut me, or not. This is going to end, and I will have gotten the money that I would have gotten over the long term here.
Right.
And that's basically how it works out. They're like, we're going to free up more money for us, and essentially we're going to give you more guaranteed money. So that works out for both of us. I think that's how it's working out. And, people will... We talk about Pittsburgh getting rid of Roethlisberger. New England gets rid of Brady.
That's even...
it'll be insane. Yeah. But I think it's going to happen at some point.
All right. I think in the last 5 minutes, we'll do an interesting thing. Because of my work with Draft Tech, I have a premium subscription through Pro Football Focus. So I think we should go through maybe what us watching football, relating to players' names, seeing it on TV, hearing the media talk about it, and just the names of players who are the best at the positions this year. Just, thinking about watching the games or hearing talk about them. Who is the best? And where do some of your Eagles sit? But before we do that, it's kind of interesting because my dad talks about Nick Foles here in a text. He says he heard rumors that the Rams are possibly in on Nick Foles. I've heard that too, so that's not crazy.
Okay.
I know, and I think
do I sign?
Most Eagles fans should be okay with that because, I said,
I'm not like we have to get rid of him, but if somebody wants him and you're going to get something of value,
we actually had a discussion last night. Our music producer Greg Hill was driving us down to our dinner last night. And we talked a little bit about the Eagles and the NFL draft, and he's talking about Nick Foles and are the Eagles going to move up for Mariota and all this. And I was like, well, if you throw Foles into that trade, you can't just be like, here's Nick Foles, give me your first-round pick.
Yeah,
it's not. That's not going to work like that. But I have heard that rumor that the Rams may be interested. I don't know. They hired some former quarterback is working in the front office down there now. I can't remember what name, but he just praised Sam Bradford, who's obviously coming off 2 straight years of basically no playing time because of injuries. We'll see what happens there with him, but maybe the Rams would be on a Foles possibility. All right, well, let's start at the most important position on the field, the one that gets all the notoriety in the quarterback position. Who would you think looking at this, regardless, who is the best quarterback in the NFL this year?
I probably would say it's tough because I'm now because
you looked at
Super
it.
Bowl. Well, and I can't get the Super Bowl out of my head.
Right.
I would say Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. And if I went on who do I think was the best this year, or who do I think is ranked the highest? Absolutely Aaron Rodgers, because the numbers and things he puts up in Green Bay are just absolutely ridiculous. And I would pick him to be ranked number one.
Yes.
I would pick Tom Brady as me, but that's tough. Like, he won the Super Bowl. That's obviously weighing in on it. Because I don't think I would have had him ranked over Rodgers if he didn't win the Super Bowl.
How good would a Packers-Patriots Super Bowl have been? Obviously, Patriots-Seahawks was pretty incredible, too.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm looking at it from the quarterback thing,
Right.
because I don't count Russell Wilson being up with those guys.
Right.
And looking at this is one of the sites that is the higher metrics, the second-level stats, as close to sabermetrics as you can get for the NFL. This is Pro Football Focus, and their proprietary data sets. Their overall quarterback rating system, it's not QBR like ESPN does. It's not quarterback rating that you can find anywhere on NFL.com statistics or anything. This is their proprietary stats coming together, giving you the overall best quarterback in terms of as a pure passer, as a runner, and in terms of penalties. And Aaron Rodgers is number one by a pretty substantial margin. He is just ahead of, crazy enough, Drew Brees.
That's the one that surprised me. Because we just talked about the year Drew Brees had. But again, that's just looking at the outcomes. The Saints were awful.
Maybe that also shows that the players around him aren't very good.
And that's another key. A lot of people talk, and not that this was the entire thing, but they're like, a lot of people said over and over again. And again, there's a correlation here, not necessarily causation, but Drew Brees really missed Darren Sproles this year. That's what a lot of people said. Because while he's not the running back that gets the most handoffs there, he was the best running back they had.
Yeah.
And Mark Ingram had a decent year.
He did.
And I was happy for him because he had kind of been up and down while he'd been there. But you could make an argument that by far the most dynamic and maybe the best running back they had was Darren Sproles. And he wasn't there this year.
Nope.
And that's a big part of it.
My dad sends in his guess for the top three, and he had Rodgers at the top, so he was right on that. And I've looked at these stats so much that I knew that Aaron Rodgers was at the top. So my dad says Rodgers, Brady, Romo would be his guess at top three. It's actually not that far off.
No, it's not.
Now, we said
off.
Rodgers was one, which we kind of figured out. Breeze maybe a surprise in second. Now, number three, maybe when you first say it, you might think, but then think about some of the games he had.
Yeah.
And how he carries that team.
Yep.
Ben Roethlisberger was third.
Kind of surprising, except think about some of the games he had this year. Didn't he throw over 500 yards in
two
back-to-back
games for 6 touchdowns? Yeah, he had like 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns in 2 games or something like that. And as much as people like to hate on him, and he didn't look good in the playoff game against the Ravens, overall full body of work.
But, again, what did we just talk about at the beginning of the show? I love, especially, I'm getting more and more removed from it, but I loved the hate on Roethlisberger as much as anyone. As much as anyone. He has so little help. He had Antonio Brown, who's good. Other than that, Le'Veon Bell, I guess, too. So he had a good running back and a good wide receiver. But other than that, he didn't have a really good offensive line. The offensive line was made by the running back, in my opinion, there. Because they had a lot of the same pieces that they've had for a couple years. And they weren't that good. So I think Bell helped make that line more than
and now he
else.
might be suspended the first 2 games of the year.
Yeah. So I just look at some of these things. I think Roethlisberger is better than a lot of people think, and that's crazy for me to say because I was always arguing he wasn't as good as a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But I think this past year he was incredible. I think as the team has gotten not maybe as strong, from position to position, he's gotten better.
Right.
But again, he takes a beating.
Yep.
Of these guys at the top. Let's look at these guys at the top. Aaron Rodgers, he gets hurt, but I don't actually feel like Rodgers takes a beating. He does, I guess, but some of that comes from the division.
Not in the same way that Roethlisberger does.
Breeze gets beat around, but he's a smaller guy. Roethlisberger, there goes Roethlisberger, and then next, to touch on those picks that
Tom Brady was fourth.
Brady was fourth.
Matt Ryan fifth.
Matt Ryan, I don't feel like ever gets touched. I know he gets sacked a bunch, but that's because their offensive line is terrible.
And
Tony Romo.
Tony Romo was sixth.
Right, who takes a beating, but a lot of that's because of his ability to extend the play, which is also the same for Roethlisberger. They get hit hard a lot because they, they are able to not be tackled by the first guy, and then they get crushed by the other guy.
Yep.
Sometimes. A lot of times they make a big throw because they avoid that tackle. But when I look at that, I wouldn't say there's a ton of surprises. One surprise would maybe be Peyton Manning.
Way down at 10th.
Except his last quarter of the season, it turns out he had a torn quad or whatever.
Something like that, yeah.
And people are like, you throw with your arms. Yes, but if you listen to everyone talk, Peyton Manning, more than any of those other guys, except maybe Breeze, needs his legs to throw. He doesn't have the cannon arm. He needs his legs to put, to really step into those throws.
The crazy thing looking at these stats is that Peyton Manning's in the top 10. He's 10th in overall. When you look at just passing, taking out running and penalties, he jumps up to 8th. But overall, remember, Aaron Rodgers was a 40. Peyton Manning's a 10. So that means Rodgers had 4 times a better season passing than Peyton Manning in terms of these proprietary statistics, which is just crazy to think about. But so this is that ProFootballFocus.com site. Do the opposite. Look at the bottom. Blake Bortles, worst quarterback in the league, followed next by Derek Carr, Kyle Orton,
which is crazy because a lot of people are really high on Derek Carr.
Right. Apparently,
and
he
actually
had a terrible
Bortles,
year. But they're both rookies. It's kind of to be expected. I don't know if any of these negative ones really shock me, but look where Kaepernick is.
Right.
28th behind Sanchez, behind Sean Hill, behind Foles, who was 25th.
Right. According to this, Foles is the lesser of two evils when you get to Foles and Sanchez.
Oh, well, yeah, but we knew that.
Yeah.
That's not a surprise at all. But look how high Teddy Bridgewater was for his first year.
People talk about how he had a solid season there. It was a quiet season, but a solid
That's good
season
when you're a rookie, though.
Heck
you don't
yeah.
need look where Bortles and Carr are.
Bridgewater
came in later in the year,
and he was without Adrian Peterson.
Right, without Peterson.
Oh my gosh, when you look at it, look, I know he didn't play a whole lot, but look where RG3 was, way down,
33rd.
Kirk Cousins, who everybody was so high on, and then he got exposed when he played. He was 24th.
In front of Foles.
Right, yeah, but touche.
Yeah, now there's 39 here, obviously.
20's Charlie Whitehurst. That's crazy. Charlie Whitehurst is better than Andy Dalton.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I guess that one is eye-opening. Andy Dalton played essentially his entire team's snap count, and he's 21st. He could very well be, and people have been saying this, the weak link in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And they just gave him a contract extension.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this is fun stats with this, and I love to do it, but we're pretty much out of time here. We'll come back in a couple weeks and maybe address this as we do our draft previews, look at maybe some spots that specifically the Eagles need to focus on. And obviously, Foles being down 25th on this list, that doesn't give you a lot of confidence. And if you go back in time, I don't think he's actually that much better either.
No.
He was 17th in 2013.
But think about how ridiculous his stats were in 2013 and to only be
17th, right.
That tells you, I say stats, his touchdown to interception ratio.
Right,
that was
which
pretty much
obviously isn't everything, and that's what this is kind of saying.
Right.
But it's a fun site, and I'm glad that I have the premium access, and while I still have it, I'm going to use it, and we'll have fun with it in a couple weeks from now on the show as we relate to the draft. But...
And it's going to be fun to follow that situation with the Eagles. What is going to happen in that draft? I don't know.
All right.
It'll be crazy. I don't know what I want either.
2 weeks ago we had the privilege of going to Wilson Minithon. That was a ton of fun. They broke through their goal of 50,000. They raised over 60,000, I think close to 62,000 or right around $62,000 for Four Diamonds Fund. We thank Ian Roth and Nate Bentz and all the guys and girls involved in the program, the advisors, everyone that invited us and helped us set up and just have such a great time. All the guys that we interviewed from the football team, and we got Preston Hoops on. I know he's been dying to come on the show. So we had a lot of good guys on the show, plus got to talk to 2 Four Diamonds families, which was a lot of fun. And just a great time 2 weeks ago. Then last week, the week that we were off, the main event in State College took place, Thon 2015, and they were again able to raise $13 million. The College of Earth and Mineral Sciences was, for the 5th straight year, the #1 independent organization. So congratulations to everyone involved with the Penn State Dance Marathon. And shout out to the College of EMS dancers and our friend Amy Schneiderhan for dancing for the Penn State Blue Band.
Got on stage and got to sing.
Singing it up a little bit on the last day. So congratulations to everyone involved in the quest to conquer pediatric cancer. Great events the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was watching online following this stream, and it was just the energy after 2 straight days of being up and literally being up, standing up and no sleeping and everything. Just the energy in that room still just kind of amazes me.
No show next week. I will be in New York or on my way back from New York, so we won't be doing a show. I know, off again, but that's just the way it works in the springtime.
We're busy people.
Yeah, but 2 weeks we'll be back. We'll be having Selection Sunday, so we'll talk about March Madness, how the bracket's going to shake out. We'll introduce our bracket challenge. It's a lot of good time there, and then when we're back, probably the next 2 weeks, we'll talk a little NFL draft, maybe do more analytics stuff. Eventually we'll get to our baseball preview and all that good stuff. Any shout-outs, anything to add? I'm trying to think if I've got any birthdays or anything to mention.
Not that I know.
Yeah, I can't think. I know we touched on a lot about a couple that were right around Valentine's Day while we were at Minithon. I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting, but we'll have to tackle it again in a few weeks.
Our basketball expert had a birthday this past
yes,
week,
you're right, but I think we mentioned him at Minithon.
I think we did,
but we'll say it again. Happy belated birthday to Adam Fowler, who maybe we'll have to talk about coming on in 2 weeks if he has the ability to get away for an hour. We'd love to have him on and talk college basketball, because between the three of us, he obviously knows a ton more. I assume, though, Kentucky probably #1 seed. That's probably my guess.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet.
All right, anything else to add?
No. We're good.
All right, thanks for joining us. This wraps up the 166th episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show.
We hope you tune in every Sunday evening at 6:30 for our take on sports. Until next time, I'm J-Raff.
And I'm Joe Mays. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, that dress was definitely black and blue.
Thanks for listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Don't forget, you can download each episode of the show from the podcast section of the iTunes Store. We'll see you next time, and thanks again for listening.